I was standing in my driveway in Springfield, Massachusetts, staring at the empty spot in my garage where my 24-foot telescoping roof rake should have been, and I knew exactly who had taken it. My name is Peter Vance, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision for 3 years. 3 relatively peaceful years, until 6 months ago when Karen Whitmore got elected as the president of our homeowners association. Karen was everything you would expect from someone whose life goal seemed to be making everyone else miserable. She was 47 years old, always wore those ridiculous oversized sunglasses even on cloudy days, and had that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," from 3 blocks away. Her blonde highlights were always perfectly done, and she carried a leather-bound notebook everywhere she went, documenting every single violation she could find in our neighborhood. The roof rake was not just any roof rake. After the brutal winter we had last year, where Springfield got hammered with over 90 inches of snow, I had invested in a top-of-the-line aluminum telescoping roof rake from a specialty company in Vermont. The thing cost me $479, and I had done something that most people would not think to do. I had the serial number professionally documented and filed with the Springfield Police Department as part of a personal property registry program they offered. My insurance agent had suggested it for high-value items, and since I had also registered my expensive power tools and lawn equipment, I added the roof rake to the list. It was a Tuesday morning in early November, and I had just gotten home from my job at the engineering firm downtown. I worked as a mechanical engineer, and my schedule was pretty regular. I pulled into my garage around 6 in the evening, and that is when I noticed the rake was gone. I had used it just 2 days prior to clear some leaves that had accumulated in my gutters. I always kept it hanging on the heavy-duty hooks along the side wall of my garage, right next to my extension ladder. My garage door had been closed all day. I was meticulous about that. The only way someone could have gotten in was if they had opened it somehow, which meant they either had my code or they had lifted it manually. The door was old enough that it could be lifted from the outside if you really put your back into it, but it would make noise. My neighbor, Todd Richards, worked from home and his office window faced my driveway. I made a mental note to ask him if he had seen anything, but before I did that, I wanted to check something. I walked across my front lawn, which I kept immaculately maintained, because Karen had cited me twice already for minor infractions. Once because my grass was apparently a 1/4 inch too tall according to her measuring tape, and another time because I had left my trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes past the prescribed pickup time. Both citations came with threatening letters about fines and potential legal action. I walked down 3 houses to where Karen lived. Her house was a colonial-style home painted in an aggressive shade of yellow that somehow had gotten approved by the architectural committee she chaired. Her yard was perfect, almost artificially so, with those geometric hedges that looked like they had been trimmed with a laser level. Her silver Lexus SUV was parked in the driveway, and I could see lights on inside the house. I rang the doorbell and waited. I could hear her small dog yapping inside, one of those high-pitched barks that felt like an ice pick to the brain. The door opened, and Karen stood there in a velour tracksuit, looking at me with immediate suspicion. "Peter," she said, not even trying to sound friendly. "What do you want?" "Hi, Karen. I was wondering if you happened to see anyone around my property today. Someone took my roof rake from my garage." Her expression did not change. She just stared at me with those cold blue eyes. "Why would I know anything about your roof rake? I was not accusing you. I was just asking if you saw anything suspicious. You know, neighborhood watch and all that." I have been busy all day with HOA business. I have not been watching your house. She started to close the door. Karen, that rake cost me almost $500. It is not just some cheap tool from the hardware store. If someone is going around stealing from garages, the whole neighborhood should know about it. She paused, and I saw something flicker across her face. It was brief, but it was there. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance that I was bothering her. "File a police report if you are so concerned," she said, and then she shut the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. The dog was still yapping inside. I had a gut feeling that Karen knew more than she was letting on, but I had no proof. Not yet. I walked back to my house and knocked on Todd's door. He answered almost immediately, still wearing his headset from whatever video call he had been on. "Hey, Peter, what is up? Did you see anyone at my place today? Someone took my roof rake from the garage." Todd frowned and thought about it. Actually, yeah. I saw Karen's car parked in your driveway this afternoon. Around 2, maybe. I thought it was weird because I did not see you home, but I figured maybe she was dropping something off or had HOA business." My jaw clenched. "How long was she there?" "Maybe 10 minutes. I was on a call, so I was not paying super close attention. But I definitely saw her car." "Thanks, Todd, I appreciate it." I went back inside my house and sat down at my kitchen table. My wife, Emma, had taken our 2 kids to visit her parents in Connecticut for the week, so I was alone with my thoughts. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police number for Springfield. The dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation. She told me an officer would come by to take a report. While I waited, I went through my files and pulled out the documentation for the roof rake. I had the original receipt, photos of the rake with the serial number visible, and the confirmation from the police department that it had been registered in their property database. The serial number was RR2847 ALUVT, and I had it written down in multiple places. Officer Marcus Johnson arrived about 40 minutes later. He was a stocky guy in his mid-30s with a shaved head and a professional demeanor. I showed him my garage, explained what had been taken, and gave him all my documentation. "You registered a roof rake with the department?" he asked, looking impressed. "I have been on the force for 12 years, and I think this is the first time I have seen someone register one of those. My insurance agent suggested I register all my expensive tools and equipment. I had some stuff stolen from a previous house, and it was impossible to prove ownership. I learned my lesson." "Smart," he said, taking photos of the empty hooks where the rake had been. "And you said your neighbor saw the HOA president at your house today, Todd Richards, 3 houses down. He works from home and saw her car in my driveway around 2 this afternoon. I was at work. I am meticulous about closing my garage door, but she could have lifted it manually from the outside." Officer Johnson wrote everything down. "Do you have any idea why she would take your roof rake?" "Honestly, Karen has been targeting me since she became HOA president. She has cited me for ridiculous violations, sent me threatening letters, and generally made my life difficult. Last week, we had a heated exchange at the HOA meeting because I called her out for selectively enforcing rules. Her friends can leave their Christmas decorations up until March, but I get cited if my grass is a 1/4 inch too tall." He nodded slowly. "I know the type. We get calls about HOA disputes pretty regularly. Most of the time it is civil stuff, but theft is criminal. Let me go have a conversation with her. I want to come with you." "I cannot let you do that, sir. Let me handle this professionally. Wait here and I will be back." I reluctantly agreed and watched as Officer Johnson walked down to Karen's house. I could not hear what was being said, but I could see the interaction through her front window. Karen was gesturing animatedly, clearly upset that a police officer was at her door. The conversation lasted about 15 minutes, and then Officer Johnson walked back to my house. "She denied taking anything from your property," he said. "She claims she was never at your house today, and she said your neighbor must be mistaken. Todd knows her car. It is a silver Lexus SUV with a custom license plate that says HOA boss. Pretty hard to mistake." Officer Johnson raised his eyebrows. "HOA boss? Really, really?" He shook his head. "Okay, here is what we are going to do. I am filing this report with all your documentation. The serial number is in the system, so if this roof rake shows up anywhere, we will know. In the meantime, I would suggest you install a security camera in your garage if you do not have one already. Also, check with your other neighbors to see if anyone else saw anything. What about searching her property? If she took it, it is probably in her garage right now. I do not have probable cause for a search warrant yet. Your neighbor's statement helps, but she denied being there, and technically, seeing a car in a driveway is not proof of theft. If we can get more evidence, we can take further action. Sometimes in these cases, the stolen property shows up in pawn shops or online marketplaces. I will flag this with our property crimes unit." I was frustrated, but understood the legal limitations. After Officer Johnson left, I spent the rest of the evening installing 2 security cameras in my garage. I had been meaning to do it anyway, but this pushed me to actually get it done. I set them up to cover every angle with motion detection and cloud storage backup. The next morning I went to work but could not focus. I kept thinking about Karen and that roof rake. During my lunch break, I decided to do some searching online. I checked Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, and OfferUp for roof rakes in the Springfield area. Nothing. Then I expanded my search to nearby cities like Hartford, Worcester, and even Boston. Still nothing. When I got home that evening, I talked to more neighbors. The Johnsons on the other side of my house had not seen anything, but Mrs. Patricia Chen, who lived directly across the street, told me something interesting. "I did see Karen's car at your place yesterday," she said. "I was getting my mail and I saw her opening your garage door. I thought it was strange, but I assumed you had given her permission for some HOA inspection or something." "What time was this?" "Around 2:15 maybe." "Did you see her leave?" "I went back inside, but her car was gone when I checked again about 15 minutes later." "Would you be willing to give a statement to the police?" Mrs. Chen hesitated. "I do not want to get involved in neighborhood drama." "Mrs. Chen, someone stole my property. This is not drama, this is theft. And if Karen is bold enough to steal from me, she might do it to others." She thought about it for a moment and then nodded. "Okay, yes, I will give a statement." I called Officer Johnson and told him about Mrs. Chen. He came by the next evening and took her statement. Now we had 2 witnesses who had seen Karen's distinctive car at my house during the time when the roof rake went missing. "This helps," Officer Johnson said. "I am going to present this to my sergeant. With 2 witnesses and your documentation, we might have enough for a warrant." 3 days passed. 3 days of me stewing in anger every time I saw Karen walking her dog past my house with that smug expression on her face. She knew she had my roof rake. I was sure of it, but I had to let the legal process work. On Saturday morning, I was washing my car in the driveway when I saw an unmarked police car pull up to Karen's house. Officer Johnson got out along with another officer in plain clothes. They knocked on her door, and Karen answered, still in her bathrobe even though it was almost noon. I could not hear the conversation, but I saw Officer Johnson hand her some papers. Her face went red, and she started shouting. The plainclothes officer said something firm, and Karen reluctantly stepped aside to let them in. I tried not to be obvious about watching, but I could not help it. Other neighbors started coming out of their houses too. Everyone knew something was happening. About 20 minutes later, the officers came out of Karen's house. Officer Johnson was carrying my roof rake. Even from a distance, I could see the distinctive orange grip and the aluminum extension poles. They put it in the back of their car and then they went back inside. Another 10 minutes passed and then they came out again. This time, Karen was with them. She was in handcuffs. She was screaming about this being harassment, about how she was going to sue everyone, about how she knew her rights. The officers calmly loaded her into the back of their car and drove away. I just stood there with my sponge dripping water on the driveway, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Officer Johnson called me an hour later. "Mr. Vance, we executed a search warrant on Miss Whitmore's property. We found your roof rake in her garage. The serial number matches what you have registered. She has been arrested for theft. What happens now? She will be arraigned, probably Monday morning. You will need to come down to identify your property and sign some paperwork so we can return it to you. Also, the district attorney might want to talk to you about pressing charges." "Oh, I am definitely pressing charges." I figured. Also, we found some other interesting items in her garage, some expensive gardening equipment and tools that do not appear to belong to her. We are going to be reaching out to other residents in your neighborhood to see if anything was reported stolen. After I hung up, I sat down heavily on my couch. Part of me felt vindicated. Karen had stolen from me, and now she was facing consequences. But another part of me felt uneasy. This was going to blow up the neighborhood. Karen had friends on the HOA board, people who would probably claim this was all a misunderstanding, or that I had somehow set her up. I was right to be worried. By Sunday afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly. First, it was Brian Thompson, the HOA vice president. He was a retired accountant who had always seemed reasonable, but now he was calling me, asking why I had sent the police after Karen. "Brian, she stole my roof rake. I have 2 witnesses who saw her at my house, and the police found it in her garage with the serial number that matches my registration. This is not complicated. But Karen would not do something like that. She is dedicated to this neighborhood. There must be some explanation. The explanation is that she committed a crime. She stole my property. Well, this is going to cause major problems for the HOA. We are going to have an emergency meeting to discuss her position. That is not my concern, Brian. My concern is that someone in a position of authority in this neighborhood used that authority to target me, harass me, and eventually steal from me. If you want to discuss problems, start there." He huffed and hung up. Then came the calls from Karen's friends. Deborah Martinez, Linda Foster, and Susan Price, all of them on various HOA committees, all of them calling to tell me I had overreacted, that I should have just talked to Karen, that involving the police was extreme. I gave them all the same answer. She stole from me. That is a crime. If you have a problem with how this was handled, take it up with the legal system. By Monday morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. I took the day off work to go to the police station and complete the paperwork for my roof rake. They had processed it as evidence, taken photos, and now they were releasing it back to me. The serial number RR2847 ALUVT was clearly visible on the aluminum shaft, exactly as I had documented. Officer Johnson walked me through the process. Miss Whitmore was arraigned this morning. She pleaded not guilty. The judge set bail at $5,000, which she posted. Her lawyer is already making noise about this being a misunderstanding, but the evidence is pretty clear. What about the other stuff you found in her garage? We have been able to connect 3 other items to neighbors in your subdivision. A pressure washer belonging to the Hendersons, an expensive hedge trimmer belonging to Mark Paulson, and a portable generator that belongs to the Kowalskis. They all reported these items missing over the past few months, but they thought they had just misplaced them or had them stolen by random thieves. None of them suspected Karen. I shook my head in disbelief. She was running a one-woman theft ring right under everyone's noses. Looks that way. The district attorney is taking this seriously. With multiple victims and her position in the HOA, this could be charged as a pattern of theft. That bumps it up in terms of potential penalties. I took my roof rake home and put it back on the hooks in my garage, right where it belonged. But I did not feel satisfied. I felt tired. This whole situation was exhausting. That evening there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mark Paulson, one of my neighbors who I occasionally chatted with at neighborhood gatherings. He was a tall guy in his 50s who worked as a high school teacher. "Hey, Peter. I heard what happened. The police called me today about my hedge trimmer. I just wanted to thank you for actually following through and reporting what Karen did. I thought I had just left it at my brother's house or something. I never imagined someone in the neighborhood would steal it." "Did you have any run-ins with Karen before it went missing?" Mark nodded. "Yeah, actually. She cited me for having my truck parked in my driveway overnight. Said it violated some obscure HOA rule about commercial vehicles, even though it is just my personal truck that I use for work. I fought it at a board meeting and won. She was furious. A week later, my hedge trimmer disappeared from my shed. She was retaliating against people who stood up to her. That is what it looks like. I am pressing charges too. My wife is nervous about the drama this is going to cause, but I told her that letting someone get away with theft just because they are in the HOA is insane." Over the next few days, more pieces of the puzzle came together. The Hendersons told me that their pressure washer had disappeared right after they filed a complaint about Karen trying to fine them for having a non-approved mailbox. The Kowalskis had challenged Karen on some landscaping rules, and their generator vanished 2 weeks later. Karen had been systematically stealing from anyone who opposed her or questioned her authority. It was not about needing the items. She lived comfortably and could afford to buy whatever she wanted. It was about power and revenge. It was about punishing people who dared to challenge her. The HOA called an emergency meeting for the following Thursday evening. It was held at the community center that our subdivision maintained. When I arrived, the parking lot was packed. It seemed like every homeowner in Meadowbrook Hills had shown up. The tension in the room was palpable. You could see the divide clearly. On one side were Karen's supporters, mostly her friends and people who had benefited from her selective rule enforcement. On the other side were the rest of us, people who had been targeted, fined, or harassed by her during her tenure as president. Brian Thompson called the meeting to order. He looked uncomfortable, constantly adjusting his glasses and clearing his throat. "We are here tonight to discuss the situation involving our president, Karen Whitmore. As many of you know, she was arrested last weekend on charges of theft. The board has been in consultation with our HOA attorney, and we have some difficult decisions to make." Deborah Martinez immediately stood up. She was one of Karen's closest allies, serving as the head of the Architectural Review Committee. "This is a witch hunt. Karen has dedicated years to this neighborhood. She has kept our property values high and maintained our standards. One misunderstanding should not destroy her reputation." I stood up. "This is not a misunderstanding. The police found my roof rake in her garage. The serial number matches my registration with the police department. She stole it from my property. They also found stolen items belonging to at least 3 other families. This is not about dedication to the neighborhood." This is about someone abusing their position to target and retaliate against residents who disagreed with her. You probably planted that stuff in her garage, Susan Price shouted from the back. Officer Johnson, who had been invited to attend the meeting, stood up then. He was not in uniform, but he had his badge on his belt. Madam, I am one of the officers who executed the search warrant. We conducted a thorough investigation. Mr. Vance did not plant anything. We have witness statements, documentation, and physical evidence. This is a criminal matter that is going through the proper legal channels. The room erupted in arguments. People were shouting over each other. Brian had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Finally, he managed to quiet everyone down enough to continue. The purpose of this meeting is to vote on whether Karen Whitmore should be removed from her position as HOA president, pending the outcome of the criminal case against her. According to our bylaws, the board can vote to remove an officer if there is cause to believe they have acted against the interests of the association. This is ridiculous, Linda Foster said. Karen should be here to defend herself. Karen was invited to attend, Brian said. Her attorney advised her not to come. The debate went on for over an hour. People shared their experiences with Karen. Some praised her for keeping the neighborhood clean and organized. Others, like me, detailed the harassment, the petty citations, and the vindictive enforcement of rules. The Hendersons talked about their missing pressure washer. Mark Paulson talked about his hedge trimmer. By the time we finally got to the vote, the room was emotionally drained. The vote was 14-8 in favor of removing Karen from her position as president. It was not unanimous, but it was clear. Brian would serve as acting president until an election could be held. As the meeting broke up, Deborah cornered me in the parking lot. "You did this," she hissed. "You destroyed her. She did this to herself. She stole from me and from other people in this neighborhood. I am sorry if that ruins your friendship, but actions have consequences. The HOA is going to fall apart without her leadership. If her leadership involved stealing from residents and abusing her authority, then maybe it should fall apart. Maybe we can build something better." I got in my car and drove home, feeling drained but also relieved. At least now the neighborhood knew the truth. At least now Karen could not hide behind her position anymore. The legal process moved forward slowly, as these things always do. Karen's attorney tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that there was no proof she had actually taken the items, that they could have been in her garage for innocent reasons. But the prosecution had the witness statements from Todd and Mrs. Chen. They had the documentation of my roof rake with the serial number, and they had the pattern of theft from multiple victims who had all been targeted after conflicts with Karen. In late January, about 2.5 months after the theft, there was a preliminary hearing. I had to testify about the roof rake, about my registration of the serial number, and about my interactions with Karen leading up to the theft. Her attorney tried to paint me as someone with a grudge, someone who was looking for any excuse to go after her. But the facts were stubborn things. The serial number on the rake found in her garage matched exactly what I had registered with the police. There was no way around that. The other victims testified too. The pattern became impossible to deny. Each person had challenged Karen on some HOA matter, and within weeks, valuable items had disappeared from their property. And those items ended up in Karen's garage. The judge found probable cause to move forward to trial. Karen's bail remained in place, but she was ordered to stay away from all the victims and from HOA meetings. The trial was scheduled for April. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Hills slowly started to return to normal. Brian turned out to be a much more reasonable HOA president. He focused on actual problems like street maintenance and snow removal, rather than measuring people's grass with a ruler. The Architectural Review Committee got some new members who were less concerned with petty aesthetic complaints and more focused on genuine issues. I installed additional security cameras around my property, not because I thought Karen would come back, but because the whole experience had made me more cautious. Emma and the kids had come back from Connecticut during all of this, and my wife was equal parts furious about the theft and proud that I had stood up for myself. Most people would have just let it go, she told me one evening as we sat on our back deck. They would have said it was not worth the hassle. Yeah, well, most people do not have their roof rake serial numbers registered with the police department, she laughed. That turned out to be the smartest thing you ever did. My insurance agent deserves credit for that suggestion. March came and went. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. Karen's supporters gradually quieted down as more details about the thefts became public. It was hard to maintain that she was innocent when the evidence was so clear. Some of them started avoiding the whole topic, pretending they had never been vocal defenders. The trial finally began on April 15th. I had to take 3 days off work to attend. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Karen sat at the defense table looking nothing like the domineering HOA president who had made my life miserable. She wore a conservative navy blue suit and barely made eye contact with anyone. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They presented my documentation of the roof rake, including the photos with the serial number visible and the registration with the police department. They showed the receipt proving I had purchased it. They brought in Todd Richards and Mrs. Chen, who testified about seeing Karen's distinctive car in my driveway on the day of the theft. Officer Johnson testified about finding the rake in Karen's garage and about the search warrant process. Then they presented the other victims. Mark Paulson testified about his hedge trimmer. The Hendersons talked about their pressure washer. The Kowalskis described their generator. Each of them testified about having conflicts with Karen over HOA matters shortly before their items disappeared. The pattern was damning. The defense attorney tried to argue that the items could have ended up in Karen's garage through innocent means, that perhaps someone was framing her, but it rang hollow. Why would someone frame her by putting stolen items in her garage that just happened to belong to people she had conflicts with? On the third day, the prosecution rested. The defense called Karen to testify. She claimed she had no idea how those items ended up in her garage. She suggested that maybe someone had planted them there to make her look bad. She said she had been at my house that day to drop off an HOA notice that my garage door had been open, and she had just left the notice by the door. She never went inside, but when the prosecutor cross-examined her, things fell apart. He asked her why she had initially told Officer Johnson that she had never been at my house that day. She stumbled through an answer about being confused. He asked her to explain how she had entered my garage to leave a notice when I had never received any notice. She said she must have dropped it and the wind blew it away. He asked why she needed to be in someone's garage for 10 minutes just to drop off a notice. She had no good answer. He methodically went through each victim. Had she had conflicts with Mark Paulson? Yes. Had she had conflicts with the Hendersons? Yes. With the Kowalskis? Yes. With me? Definitely yes. And was it just a coincidence that all of these people who had opposed her on HOA matters happened to have valuable items stolen, and those items ended up in her garage? She insisted it was a conspiracy against her, but even as she said it, I could see the jury did not believe her. The closing arguments happened on a Friday afternoon. The prosecutor laid out the timeline, the evidence, and the pattern. He argued that Karen Whitmore had used her position as HOA president to identify targets, to figure out when they would not be home, and to steal from them as retaliation for challenging her authority. He argued that this was not a simple theft. This was an abuse of power, a betrayal of trust, and a violation of everything an HOA was supposed to represent. The defense attorney argued reasonable doubt. He said the prosecution had not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Karen had actually taken the items. He said the circumstantial evidence could have other explanations, but his heart did not seem to be in it. He knew he was fighting a losing battle. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they came back, the forewoman stood and read the verdict: guilty on 4 counts of theft. Guilty on 1 count of burglary for entering my garage without permission. Guilty on a charge of criminal trespass. Karen's face went white. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder. The judge thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later. I sat in that courtroom feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief that justice had been served. Anger that it had come to this in the first place. Sadness that someone who could have used her position to genuinely help the neighborhood had instead used it to hurt people. The sentencing hearing was on May 8th. I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium and looked at Karen, who stared down at the table in front of her. Your Honor, when I moved to Meadowbrook Hills, I was excited to be part of a community. I believed that the HOA was there to help maintain our neighborhood and to resolve conflicts. Instead, Karen Whitmore turned the HOA into a weapon. She used her position to harass residents who disagreed with her. She selectively enforced rules to punish people who stood up to her. And when that was not enough, she stole from us. She violated our homes and our trust. My roof rake was not just a tool. It represented the work I put into maintaining my home. It represented my investment in this community, and she took it because I had the audacity to question her at a meeting. I am glad she has been found guilty, and I hope that the sentence reflects the seriousness of what she did. Thank you. Mark Paulson gave a statement. So did the Hendersons and the Kowalskis. Each of them described the violation they felt, the betrayal by someone who was supposed to be serving the community. The judge listened carefully to all of it. When it was time to pass sentence, she looked directly at Karen. Miss Whitmore, you held a position of trust in your community. You were elected to serve your neighbors, to help maintain and improve your neighborhood. Instead, you abused that trust. You used your position to identify targets and to retaliate against anyone who challenged you. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a pattern of behavior spanning several months and involving multiple victims. The court finds that a substantial period of incarceration is warranted. She sentenced Karen to 18 months in jail for each count of theft, to run concurrently. She added an additional 12 months for the burglary charge, to run consecutively. Total sentence, 30 months, 2.5 years. Karen would be eligible for parole after serving 18 months if she maintained good behavior. Additionally, Karen was ordered to pay restitution to all the victims for the full value of the items stolen, plus any costs associated with the investigation and trial. She was also ordered to pay a fine to the state and to complete 200 hours of community service upon release. Karen broke down crying as the sentence was read. Her attorney immediately indicated they would appeal, but the judge was unmoved. Karen was remanded into custody immediately. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like a weight had been lifted. It was over. The whole nightmare was finally over. The neighborhood reaction was mixed, as expected. Karen's friends were bitter about the sentence, claiming it was too harsh. But most people, even those who had initially defended her, had to admit that the evidence was overwhelming. You could not argue with the facts. The HOA held an election in June, and Brian Thompson was formally elected as president. He ran on a platform of transparency, fairness, and actually serving the community rather than ruling over it. He won in a landslide. One of his first acts was to review all of the citations and fines that Karen had issued during her tenure. Many of them were rescinded as being overly harsh or selectively enforced. My citations for having grass a quarter-inch too tall and for having trash cans visible for 15 extra minutes were both wiped from the record. It felt good to have that vindication, even though at this point it was mostly symbolic. Life returned to normal surprisingly quickly. The drama faded as other things took priority. Someone's basement flooded during a heavy rainstorm. The community pool needed repairs before summer. The entrance sign got damaged by a delivery truck and needed replacing. Normal neighborhood stuff. I kept my roof rake hanging in my garage, right where it belonged. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded of the importance of documentation and standing up for yourself. If I had not registered that serial number, if I had not insisted on following through with the police report, if I had just accepted the theft and moved on, Karen would still be out there. She would still be abusing her position, still be stealing from people, still be making life miserable for anyone who challenged her. Emma and I talked about moving at one point, just to get away from the whole situation. But we decided to stay. This was our home. We had invested in it, both financially and emotionally. We had built relationships with our neighbors. Why should we be the ones to leave because someone else had committed crimes? The security cameras I installed ended up being a good investment for reasons beyond the Karen situation. They caught the kid from 2 streets over who had been going around egging cars on Halloween. They recorded the delivery driver who claimed he had delivered a package that I never received. They gave us peace of mind when we went on vacation. In August, about 6 months after Karen was sentenced, I got a call from her attorney. Karen wanted to apologize and to ask if I would consider supporting her parole application when she became eligible. I thought about it for a long time. Emma thought I should just say no and be done with it. But I told the attorney I would consider it only if Karen provided a full, genuine apology to all of her victims, and if she agreed to never serve in any HOA leadership position again. A week later, I received a letter from Karen. It was handwritten, 6 pages long. She apologized for stealing my roof rake. She apologized for abusing her position. She talked about how the power of being HOA president had gone to her head, how she had started to see any disagreement as a personal attack, how she had justified the thefts to herself as somehow teaching people a lesson. She admitted that she needed help, that she was working with a therapist in prison to understand why she had acted the way she did. She said she understood if I could never forgive her, but she wanted me to know that she was truly sorry. I read the letter twice. Then I showed it to Emma. We talked about it over dinner that night. "Do you believe her?" Emma asked. "I do not know. Maybe. She is in prison. She has had a lot of time to think about what she did. Whether she actually learned anything or whether she is just saying what she thinks I want to hear, I cannot tell." "What are you going to do?" "I am going to write back. I am going to tell her that I accept her apology, but that accepting an apology does not mean forgetting what happened. And I am going to make it clear that I will oppose any attempt by her to serve in any HOA or community leadership role in the future. If she truly wants to make amends, she can do it by being a good neighbor, not by seeking power again." I wrote that letter and sent it. I never heard back from Karen, and I was fine with that. When her parole hearing came up 9 months later, I sent a letter to the parole board. I acknowledged her apology. I said that I believed in rehabilitation and second chances. But I also laid out the facts of what she had done, and said that I believed the full sentence was appropriate given the pattern of abuse and the betrayal of trust. Karen was denied parole. She would serve the full 30 months. I did not feel good about it, but I did not feel bad either. It just was what it was. Life moved on. The HOA under Brian's leadership became what it should have been all along, a tool for maintaining the neighborhood, not a weapon for controlling people. Violations were handled with warnings and offers to help before fines were ever considered. Rules were enforced consistently and fairly. Board meetings became boring, which was exactly what they should be. My kids grew another year older. Emma got a promotion at work. I completed a major project at the engineering firm that had been consuming my time for months. We took a vacation to Maine and actually enjoyed it without worrying about what was happening at home. 2.5 years after the theft, Karen was released from prison. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to New Hampshire to live with her sister. She sold her house in Meadowbrook Hills, taking a loss because the story of what she had done had become well known in the area. I never saw her again. The roof rake remained hanging in my garage. I used it that winter when we got hit with a surprise January snowstorm that dumped 16 inches on Springfield. The thing worked perfectly, just as it had when I first bought it. The serial number RR2847 ALUVT was still clearly visible on the aluminum shaft. Sometimes, when I was in the garage working on something, I would look at that roof rake and think about everything that had happened. How a simple theft had unraveled an entire pattern of abuse. How documentation and following through had made all the difference. How standing up to someone in authority, even when it was uncomfortable and difficult, had been the right thing to do. I thought about Karen too, sometimes. I wondered if she had actually changed, if prison had given her the perspective she needed, or if she was just biding her time until she could find another community to dominate. I hoped for the former, but suspected the latter. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others just learn to hide their behavior better. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA became something of a cautionary tale in our area. Other neighborhoods heard about what had happened, and several of them reviewed their own HOA structures and rules to prevent similar abuses. Our local news station did a story about HOA overreach and used Karen's case as the prime example. The story went semi-viral online, and for a few weeks, people from all over the country were emailing me asking about my experience. I did a few interviews, always emphasizing the same points. HOAs can serve important functions in maintaining neighborhoods, but they need checks and balances. People in HOA leadership need to remember that they are servants of the community, not rulers of it. And residents need to stand up when they see abuse, even when it is easier to just go along. One of the unexpected benefits of the whole situation was that our neighborhood became much tighter knit. Shared trauma, even relatively minor trauma like HOA drama, can bring people together. We started having more neighborhood gatherings. Someone organized a summer block party that became an annual tradition. The Johnsons started a neighborhood watch program that was actually about safety and community, not about spying on each other for HOA violations. Todd Richards and I became good friends. We started a tradition of weekend barbecues where we would invite various neighbors over. Mark Paulson joined our little group, and so did a few others. We would sit around, grill some burgers, drink some beer, and talk about normal stuff: sports, politics, work, family. The kinds of things neighbors should talk about. Emma integrated into the neighborhood's social scene too. She became friends with some of the other wives, and they started a book club that met once a month. Our kids made friends with the other kids on the street. It became the kind of neighborhood we had hoped for when we first moved in, before Karen had turned everything toxic. I never regretted filing that police report. I never regretted following through with the prosecution. I never regretted standing up at that HOA meeting and calling out the abuse. Yes, it had been stressful. Yes, it had been time-consuming. Yes, it had created conflict and drama. But it had been the right thing to do. My insurance agent, who had suggested registering the serial numbers of my valuable property, got a kick out of the whole story. I ran into him at a coffee shop about a year after the trial, and he could not stop laughing. "I have been telling people to register their stuff for 20 years, he said. "You are the first person where it actually made a difference in catching a thief, and you registered a roof rake. That is incredible. Best advice you ever gave me. I am going to use your story in my presentations, with your permission, of course. Go ahead. If it convinces other people to document their property, it is worth it." He did use the story, and I heard from a few people who registered their stuff because of it. One guy even caught a thief who had stolen his snowblower, all because he had the serial number documented. Small victories, but they add up. As I write this, it has been nearly 3 years since Karen stole my roof rake. 3 years since this whole saga began. The roof rake is still in my garage, still working perfectly. The security cameras are still recording. The neighborhood is still thriving under better leadership. And I still live in the same house with the same family, enjoying the community we have built. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Maybe I would have installed those security cameras sooner. Maybe I would have been more vocal earlier about Karen's abuse of power. But overall, no. I would make the same choices. I would file the same police report. I would push for the same prosecution. I would give the same testimony. Because at the end of the day, it was not really about a roof rake. It was about the principle that no one, regardless of their position or authority, gets to steal from people and abuse their power without consequences. It was about standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. It was about documentation, persistence, and refusing to be bullied. The roof rake was just the catalyst. The real story was about a community learning to stand up to a tyrant, about the legal system working the way it should, and about the importance of holding people accountable for their actions. Every winter, when the snow starts falling and I pull out that roof rake to clear my roof, I am reminded of all of this. I am reminded that sometimes the smallest things, like registering a serial number, can make the biggest difference. I am reminded that standing up for yourself matters. I am reminded that justice, while sometimes slow, can prevail. And I am reminded to always, always close my garage door. The neighborhood kids sometimes ask me about the HOA lady who went to jail. Their parents have told them the story, usually as a cautionary tale about respect for other people's property. I keep my answers simple. I tell them that someone took something that did not belong to them, that I proved it was mine, and that the person faced consequences. I tell them that the lesson is to always be honest, to respect other people's stuff, and to understand that actions have consequences. Emma sometimes jokes that I should write a book about the whole experience. HOA horror stories, how a roof rake took down a tyrant, she suggests with a laugh. I tell her that nobody would believe it. Truth is stranger than fiction, and this whole story is proof of that. The HOA board asked me to serve on a committee last year. I politely declined. I had had enough of HOA drama to last a lifetime. I am happy to be a regular homeowner who pays his dues, follows the reasonable rules, and otherwise lives his life without getting involved in neighborhood politics. Brian understood. He actually said he did not blame me, but I did agree to speak at a neighborhood orientation for new residents. We started doing these quarterly sessions where new people who move into Meadowbrook Hills can learn about the HOA, meet the board, and ask questions. At one of these sessions, I told my story. I did not name Karen specifically, but everyone knew who I was talking about. I told the new residents that the HOA was there to serve them, not to control them. I told them that if they ever felt they were being unfairly targeted or harassed, they should document everything and not be afraid to stand up for themselves. Several people came up to me after that session to thank me. One woman told me she had been in an HOA nightmare in her previous neighborhood and had ended up moving rather than fighting it. She said hearing my story made her feel better about giving this neighborhood a chance. That made it all worthwhile. If my experience could help someone else, if it could prevent another Karen from abusing power, if it could encourage someone to stand up for themselves, then the stress and drama and time had served a purpose beyond just getting my roof rake back. The roof rake itself has become something of a legend in the neighborhood. Kids point at it when they walk by my open garage. Adults make jokes about it at neighborhood gatherings. There's the famous roof rake, someone will say, and everyone laughs. It has become a symbol of sorts. A reminder that even the smallest act of injustice deserves to be challenged. A reminder that documentation and persistence can triumph over power and authority. I have never been particularly political or activist-minded. I am just a guy who works as an engineer, tries to take care of his family, and wants to live peacefully in his neighborhood. But the experience with Karen taught me that sometimes you do not get to choose whether to stand up. Sometimes the situation chooses you. And when it does, you have to decide what kind of person you are going to be. I chose to be the kind of person who does not let someone steal from me and get away with it. I chose to be the kind of person who follows through, who trusts the legal system to work, who stands up at community meetings even when half the room is against me. I chose to be the kind of person who documents serial numbers and installs security cameras and does not give up when things get difficult. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. Not just for me, but for Mark Paulson and the Hendersons and the Kowalskis, and everyone else who Karen had targeted. It made a difference for the whole neighborhood, which got better leadership and a healthier community culture as a result. So yes, this is a story about an HOA Karen who stole my roof rake and did not know that my serial number was filed with the police. But it is also a story about standing up to bullies, about the importance of documentation, about community resilience, and about the fact that justice, while not always swift, can prevail when good people refuse to back down. The roof rake still hangs in my garage, serial number RR2847ALUVT clearly visible. It is just a tool, a piece of aluminum and plastic designed to remove snow from roofs. But it represents so much more than that now. It represents accountability. It represents justice. It represents the principle that no one is above the law, no matter what position they hold or how much authority they think they have. And every time I look at it, I smile.